Happy Mid-Autumn Festival, everyone! I'm Amanda, a Chinese storyteller who specializes in sharing Asian paranormal tales. I hope whoever's watching this video stays healthy and gets to enjoy a warm reunion with family. Speaking of the Mid-Autumn Festival, the first things that come to mind are Chang'e's Flying to the Moon, the Jade Rabbit, and of course, family reunion. The two stories I'm sharing today are connected to rabbits and family. And for the first one, the rabbit story, I really want to hear your thoughts. Because honestly, it's the most contradictory story I've ever read. As always, I'll be telling the stories in the first person. And there will be a few spooky images in the video, so whenever you see this symbol, make sure to cover your eyes if you don't want to get scared. These stories is burned into my childhood memories, and it made me believe in karma. I was born in the year of the rabbit, and that year I was 12, so it was my zodiac year. Back then, during Chinese New Year, my mom would take me to the temple fair. While she was putting on her makeup, I went ahead and waited downstairs. Now, I gotta be real with you. Even at 12, I'd already picked up smoking. Yeah, I know, dumb as hell. So I took the opportunity to sneak off to a quiet spot and lit up a cigarette, then just wandered around. And wouldn't you know it, I ran into two friends, so the three of us started hanging out. Since it was New Year, there were firecracker scraps all over the ground. But there were always a few dust that hadn't gone off, so we'd find these dead firecrackers and light them up. Eventually, we somehow ended up at this pavilion in the neighborhood, and on the stone table at the center of it, there was a little rabbit. It was a pure white rabbit, pretty chubby, lying motionless on the table. We all crowded around, leaning in for a closer look. The rabbit was breathing really heavily, eyes barely open, like it was about to die. Just as we were about to touch it, it suddenly started convulsing, then went still again. We poked it with a stick, no reaction at all. It really seemed like it was dying. Then one of my friends said, "Let's burn a little, see if it moves." Without thinking, I whipped out my lighter and held it to the rabbit's belly. Stunned by the flames, the poor thing used its last bit of strength to roll onto its side, legs kicking wildly as the convulsions got even worse. Soon, a big patch of its fur was scorched away. I aimed the lighter at its nose, and that was the final straw. The rabbit practically twisted in agony, struggled for a few seconds, and then it was dead. Please don't hate me. I regret it too. I was just a dumb kid who thought it was fun. If I could go back in time now, I'd slap myself across the face. Once the rabbit died, we all split up. Right then, my mom came out, so I turned around and happily headed off to the temple fair, totally forgot about what just happened. The fair was absolutely packed. Like every year, it was holding a big lottery event. The grand prize was a car, which sounded amazing. Of course, everyone knew the chances of winning were slim to none, but they still bought the scratch-off tickets for good luck. It was more about the fun and the festive vibe than the prize itself. Of course, us kids couldn't buy tickets, so we crouched down and searched the ground. For what? Lottery tickets that hadn't been scratched yet. Maybe we'd get lucky. You never know. However, while I was digging through piles of tickets, I suddenly got this intense feeling of being watched. I looked up, and less than 10 meters away, there was a little white rabbit. This rabbit was tiny, motionless on the ground, its red eyes just staring at me. But here's the weird thing. With all those people at the temple fair, not a single person seemed to notice it or step on it. Everyone seemed to automatically avoid that spot, like they'd all agreed to beforehand. I tugged at my mother's arm, blurting out that there was a rabbit up ahead and I want to grab it. She gave it a long look, eyebrows raised, then shook her head and held me back, muttering it seemed off, maybe even a scam. I kept glancing over my shoulder as we walked, my eyes glued to that little creature, unwilling to let it out of sight. And here's where it gets really weird. No matter which direction I walked, the rabbit would turn to face me. It was genuinely watching me. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore and just ran over and scooped it up. I still remember that rabbit. It was incredibly cute. So furry, so small, I could hold it in just one hand. What's more, the little rabbit seemed to really like me too. Just stay quiet in my arms, not moving at all. I was thrilled, carried it all the way home, gently placed it on the sofa. That's when I noticed its back leg was injured. A long gash, still bleeding. I felt so bad for it and quickly got some alcohol to disinfect the wound. The whole time, the rabbit was so well behaved, just like that big rabbit I'd burned to death, completely still, staring at me. Just as I finished bandaging it, the rabbit moved for the first time. I remember this so clearly. It hopped to the edge of the table, and somehow I reached out my hand, and it jumped right onto it. I was over the moon. This little rabbit definitely liked me. From that moment on, it became my first pet. I named it Yuan Yuan, fate in Chinese, because I really feel like we were meant to find each other. For the next day, I took it everywhere. It became my best friend. But good things didn't last long. Our bond only lasted 2 days. On the 4th day of the new year, I woke up to terrible news. Yuan Yuan was dead. I rushed to the balcony and saw Yuan Yuan lying quietly on the ground, its belly swollen like a balloon. I looked at the vegetable leaves nearby and understood. It had literally eaten itself to death. I felt like my head was buzzing, tears just burst out. I couldn't control them. I just couldn't understand, why would it do that? Grandma tried to comfort me, saying it was just too young to know how to control itself. I had no time to overthink though. I gently held its tiny body and laid it to rest in our little garden. That day, my heart was shattered. I felt utterly powerless, left with nothing to do but wait and hope time would heal the pain. Now, if you said burning the big rabbit and finding the little one were all just coincidences, sure, I guess that could work. But what happened to me the day after Yuan Yuan died, that really wasn't a coincidence. That's what truly made me realize that karma is real. The 5th day of the new year, Mom took me to my grandma's house. Usually, I'd be happy about that, but because of Yuan Yuan, I was really down, so I went out alone to clear my head. Grandma lived in Chang'e, in a really quiet, almost deserted housing complex, with a huge stretch of wasteland right behind it. The winter weeds were golden yellow and really tall, with tons of crows hiding in them. I picked up a rock and threw it into the grass. Instantly, a huge flock of crows took off, blocking out the sky. Seeing this made me happy, like a prank had succeeded. I was enjoying the scenery, walking backwards. But suddenly, something bumped me from behind, and I immediately lost my balance and started falling backward. Because I was walking backwards, I didn't know what was behind me. But I had a bad feeling, because the ground there wasn't flat. If there was a rock or a piece of metal or something, hitting my head would be serious. I was completely panicked. Arms were thrashing about on their own, but right before I touched the ground, I felt this unknown force behind me, like a pair of hands, pushing me hard. And it was that force that let me regain my footing. The whole thing happened in an instant. I quickly turned around to look, and what I saw made my legs go weak. Behind me was this huge pit someone had dug. This pit was insanely deep. How deep? I got down on the edge and looked in. It was pitch black. Couldn't see the bottom at all. The first thing I bumped into was an iron rod, but since it wasn't very big, I'd already knocked it into the pit. So, if I'd actually fallen in, I definitely would have died on impact. And even if I somehow survived, in such a desolate place, nobody would have found me. The more I thought about it, the more terrified I got. I was shaking all over. But then I wondered, what was that force that saved me at that critical moment? I didn't even have time to think, I just ran straight home. But that wasn't the end of it. Something even more shocking was waiting for me. That night, as I was getting ready for bed, I took off my jacket, and to my surprise, I found a mark on it. It was about the length of a rabbit's paw, right on my right shoulder. In that moment, I suddenly thought of Yuan Yuan. Could it have been the one that saved me? Or was it just some dust I accidentally brushed against? I've kept this story buried inside me, never told anyone. As I got older, I intended to believe it must be karma. Because I saved Yuan Yuan at the Temple Fair, so it saved me at that critical moment. So what do you think, watching this? To be honest, it's a warm story, isn't it? I feel like this story has two twists. At first, when Yuan Yuan appeared at the Temple Fair, I thought he had come to revenge. But he didn't. Then when I thought the OP just raised Yuan Yuan and quietly atoned for what he'd done, Yuan Yuan suddenly died. So putting it all together, I had this bold theory. When Yuan Yuan appeared at the Temple Fair, it was giving OP one final test of his humanity. If he hadn't treated it kindly then, he definitely would have faced retribution. But OP did adopt it kindly, so Yuan Yuan's mission was complete. It left for another world. And when OP was in danger, Yuan Yuan saved him. Maybe. What do you think? The Mid-Autumn Festival is supposed to be a time of reunion, but my mother's life stopped forever on this day, casting a shadow over every Mid-Autumn for me from then on. Although caring for her during that period was filled with pain and reluctance, some mysterious things also happened along the way. Here, I like to write everything down as a final remembrance of her. In 2013, my mother suddenly fell ill. We rushed her to the hospital and were hit with shocking news: late-stage cervical cancer. I couldn't believe it and took her to hospitals all over the country seeking second opinions, but every single doctor gave us the same conclusion: go home and treat her conservatively. The cancer cells had already spread beyond any hope of cure. The only thing left for us was to accompany her through her final year. At that time, I felt as if the sky had fallen on me, helpless and in despair. Every day, I cried my eyes out. Then one day, as a kind of psychological comfort, I went to Huayan Temple. Kneeling in front of the Bodhisattva Guanyin, I prayed. I was willing to exchange 10 years of my own life to give my mother 2 more years. For this, I vowed to sincerely recite the Heart Sutra every day and to treat people kindly. It seemed the Bodhisattva really heard my prayer. A few days later, I heard of a professor who had proposed a special chemo radiotherapy plan. With the why not try mentality, I took my mother there. After one course of treatment, her condition actually improved dramatically. But the side effect came too: a drastic change in temperament. She began to swing from joy to anger, often lashing out at me with harsh words. And she absolutely refused to go through a second round of treatment. We all thought perhaps the therapy was indeed unbearable painful. In the end, after a family discussion, we brought her back home. During the following period, Mother's condition was relatively stable and her spirits were good. We relaxed, lulled into that false sense of security. But soon enough, the 2 years were up. It was a blazing summer, and I accompanied a friend to Beibei to consult a fortune teller. The whole process was really just between the master and my friend. But just as we were finishing, the master suddenly handed me his tortoise shell and told me to silently think of what was on my mind. He would cast a divination for me. Naturally, I was wishing for my mother's recovery as I cast a few copper coins, the master's tools for reading omens. Unexpectedly, the coins fell in a troubling pattern, and the master said straight away, "Your mother will face a hurdle this September. If she makes it through, she can live until 2019. At that time, my mother was vacationing in another city, spending her days happily with her friends. There was no sign of getting worse, but his words drastically made me feel uneasy. Time quickly slipped into August. After coming back from the summer retreat, my mother suddenly couldn't pass urine and her legs began to swell. We rushed her to the hospital. On the day we admitted her, I was overcome with a strange grief, a deep feeling that this time she would never come out. She stayed there until the eve of the Mid-Autumn Festival. In those months, her condition deteriorated step by step and her spirit slowly collapsed. Many times, she would suddenly wake up from sleep in fright, saying someone was pushing her, and she was terrified. A few days later, her symptoms became more and more severe. As soon as the night fell, she began to hallucinate, and the things she said often chilled us to the bone. At that point, I knew my mother's days were numbered. The farewell was finally coming. At noon on Mid-Autumn Day, I was dozing on the caretaker's cot when I dreamed of a tall figure in a black robe. In the dream, he just stood outside the ward, staring at my mother. What's strange is that I feel completely conscious and even asked the shadow if it had come to take my mother away. The figure didn't answer. When I walked toward it, it flashed instantly to the far window, lowered its head, and stared at my hand without moving. Looking down, I realized I was wearing a string of Jade Buddhist prayer beads. Perhaps it was this bracelet that kept it from coming close, so it couldn't take my mother away. When I awoke, my chest felt heavy and blocked. Looking at my frail mother lying in bed, my heart ached. I wanted so badly for her to stay, but it was just too painful for her. I quietly took off the bracelet and put it into my bag, tears welling in my eyes. And that night, my mother's heart stopped twice, but she was revived both times. In her final moment, she turned to me, looked weakly, and said, "My dear, what will you do when I'm gone?" Then, a dull tear slid from the corner of her eye, and she finally left this world. Looking back now, did the vow I made to the Bodhisattva actually come true? My mother's sudden improvement had been so strange. Among all those undergoing chemo at the same time, no one else improved as quickly as she did. Not even the doctors could explain it. But now, there's no point in agonizing over it. My mother had been freed from her illness. That is the best ending. And it seems she's still watching over me. I've always had a weak constitution since childhood. According to fortune tellers, my 八字 is soft, so I've often run into strange things. After my mother passed away, my husband wanted to cheer me up, moved us into a friend's vacant apartment. The apartment was in Daxing Village, Jiangbei District. The building dated back to the 1980s, with a cramped layout and poor natural light. When we first moved in, I noticed that even though the apartment wasn't on the street, every day the dining table and the sofa in the living room were covered with a visible layer of dust. I couldn't make sense of it. Where did that dust come from? Looking back now, it was practically a warning that there was something dirty in the house, but I didn't recognize it then. The first month passed peacefully, except that there were always sounds of furniture being dragged upstairs. I went upstairs and knocked on the door, hoping to get someone to answer, but there was no reply. Gradually, for reasons I couldn't explain, I started to fear the apartment. I never dared stay there alone. It wasn't until 2 months later, when my best friend came over to visit, that I realized there was truly something wrong with the place. My husband was away on a business trip then, so I asked my friend to keep me company. One night, one moment I was lying in bed chatting with her, and the next second, my vision went black. When I regained sight, I was already sitting up in bed. Turning around, my friend was absolutely terrified. She swallowed hard and, trying to sound calm, said, "Come on, let's go to an internet cafe tonight." It wasn't until we got to the cafe that she finally told me the truth. That apartment definitely has a problem. I felt uneasy the moment I walked in. Just now, you suddenly let out a scream and sat bolt upright on the bed. It scared me to death. The next day, my husband came home. I told him everything, but she brushed it off. That same night, I had a dream. In the dream, I went to my mother's grave. It was raining. My mother was standing at the grave looking at me, and beside her was my grandmother. Both of them were in tattered clothes and had no umbrellas, looking so pitiful that my heart ached and I woke up sobbing. At daybreak, I immediately bought paper money and burned them at the grave for them. That very night, I dreamed of her again. This time, she was dressed cleanly, full of energy, and thanked me under the bright sun. That should have been the end of it, but I still felt a lingering unease. I regularly burned offerings for both of them. Why were they still living so poorly in my dreams? What happened next explained everything. Not long after, I began experiencing chest pain, tightness, and shortness of breath. After visiting several major hospitals, no one could find anything wrong. Finally, a note professor gently hinted that I had an anxiety disorder uncommon for someone my age. Thinking back to that problematic apartment, I went straight to find a spiritual medium. She lived not far from us. After I told her my situation, she rolled an egg over my head and shoulders while chanting incantations, then looked at the egg and said my condition was serious. She said, "You've been taken as a substitute. I see one underworld messenger holding a chain and another one holding the book of life and death. They've already taken 2 of your souls. If your mother and grandmother hadn't been constantly giving them money and begging, you would have died long ago." Okay, let me explain. In Chinese culture, it's believed that a person has 3 souls and 7 spirits. The souls govern a person's consciousness, while the spirit controls the subconscious or inner nature. Once a person loses a soul, they easily become confused or demented. This perfectly explained why the OP had suddenly screamed and sat up in bed. Okay, back to the medium. After she said that, she lit a bundle of spirit money and dry straw, then threw the egg into the fire. Terrifyingly, the cooked egg white showed a blue human face. She said she would have to perform rituals for 3 consecutive days and I must stay home the entire time, absolutely not going out. On the 3rd night, my husband and I were watching TV at home. Near 3 in the morning, we both heard the sound of chains dragging on the ground outside the window. Our little dog let out a low, fearful growl. I quickly turned off the TV, grabbed the dog, and hid under the blanket, trembling. The next morning, we went back to the medium. This time, the egg she rolled over me looked normal. The old woman sighed and said, "A life for a life. My old man had been paralyzed for so many years. His passing is a kind of release. It's all karma." A few months later, her husband died, peacefully in sleep. After returning home, I immediately moved out. A month later, I found out I was pregnant, even though I had been taking my birth control pills every day. Thinking of that word, karma, I felt this child was destined to come and decided to have the baby. A few months later, after we moved, I learned from others that 2 elderly people had passed away in that very apartment. My friend's parents. His mother had died of cancer there, and his father had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage inside. So, were they the ones who were trying to take my soul? But they had died of natural causes. Why were they still so unwillingly to go? I think that once someone dies in the house, there's always a chance it will turn into a haunted house. If it's just a natural death, the resentment is weaker, so the chance is much lower. But it doesn't mean it's impossible. So let me break down the whole process for you. OP's friend's parents both passed away in the house, but their spirits didn't seem willingly to leave. When OP moved in, her own energy was weak, so the 2 spirits reported her name to the underworld officials, who then mistakenly thought OP was someone whose time had come, and started dragging at her soul. Meanwhile, OP's late mother and grandmother noticed what was happening. They kept bribing the underworld messenger so OP wouldn't be harmed, which slowed down the process, and they even appeared in her dream to warn her. Then came the old lady. Her own husband had been bedridden for years, so she swapped OP's name with his, letting him die in OP's place. But here's the twist. The old man was later reborn in OP's body, even though she had been taking birth control. That's why the old lady said, "A life for a life, it's all karma." But at this point, I want to ask you all a question. Would you trade 10 years of your own life to extend a loved one's life by just 1 year? Especially if that person is seriously ill. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Alright, that's all for today's video. As for the next story, wow, it's going to be something else. I'll be sharing a long tale from Japan, rich with the local custom and culture. So don't miss it. See you next Saturday night. Bye bye.